The following movie has been classified 15, suitable only for persons of 15 years and over.
"1989's Best of the Best" is a martial arts come action-style fictional biopic sports movie of the ilk of the likes of The Karate Kid, the Rocky movies, and to a lesser extent, the American Ninja films. This was another one of those instances where I happened across this movie as part of a large haul of VHS tapes I'd picked up a couple of years ago, and the owner was clearly a fan of the series as he had 3 of the 4 films just sat next to each other all in one haul. Though clearly not so big of a fan that he'd bother owning them legitimately, as the first and second entries are taped off the telly, nor so much of a fan that he could be bothered to buy part 4. And while both this entry and others in the series aren't exactly elevated cinema at its finest, at least with the first entry, I found quite a bit to enjoy. The film follows 5 American gents as they're selected and trained up to compete in an international karate tournament in Seoul, Korea. These are Alex, Tommy, Travis, Sonny and Virgil. And all of them have their own hang-ups, quirks and crosses to bear that'll eventually come out over the course of the film's runtime. The team are assigned to Coach Frank, played by James Earl Jones, whose no-nonsense, no excuses, no bullshit attitude quickly puts the team in their place, setting the pressures and expectations at a fevered high before they've even set foot in the gym. Frank takes no crap and he has very high standards on what he expects. You see, he thinks he's got a winning plan on his hand by following the data trends of the Korean fighters that the US will be up against, along with studying hours of video of the Korean team training and fighting, combined with a super intensive training regime that he hopes will eventually reveal the weaknesses of the Korean team and give the US fighters the advantage. All seems to be going super serious and intensely, until he's interrupted by his new training assistant, Catherine, who's not only a woman, shock horror, but also she's one of these hippy-dippy weirdos who thinks that fighting is all about the mind as well as the body. At least, that's what Frank thinks. At first he's very hesitant, but eventually he lets her do her thing and the results begin to speak for themselves. The team gets super good, super quick. Within no time at all, Alex and Tommy strike up a near inseparable bromance, making sure they're there for each other through thick and thin and having each other's backs when the fighting starts. Virgil and Sonny also end up in a kinda sorta friendship together too, leaving Travis to be the lonely racist arsehole he pretty much deserves to be. Seriously, he's so racist in this movie and such an arsehole. With days to go before the big competition commences, disaster strikes, as Alex's kid is hit by a car and falls into a coma. The coach leaves Alex with an ultimatum: go and see his possibly dying son and leave the team, or stay and remain in the team. Alex quits, obviously, which causes all the pent-up pressures of the rest of the team to boil over. Tommy, who's been having horrific flashbacks to a time in his childhood where he witnessed the guy he's set to fight kill someone in a karate tournament, gets cold feet and he leaves too. And with 2/5 of the team gone, the remaining 3 teammates struggle to maintain the morale to keep going. With the clock ticking, will Coach accept Alex and Tommy back into the team and struggle on to Korea for ultimate victory? Or will the team who was supposed to be the best of the best find themselves only the best of the worst? From a scripting standpoint, the film's both enjoyable and problematic. The pacing and structure aren't great, there's no real sense of gear shift between the first, second and third acts. Don't get me wrong, the basic tropes are all still there, you know, the gang set off on a journey, there's a struggle, the all is lost moment, and a bit where the gang put aside their differences, pull together and round off the movie. But whereas a good script scatters these elements out cleanly across the 3-act structure, or better still, does these elements in such a way that you don't really notice they're there at all, this film's first act drastically underruns and then the second act drastically overruns, crashing into a super cheesy, tonally out of place, super short third act. Had they all had even pacing, it would have been structured like Act 1, we get to know the gang, they're chosen, they're explained the rules of the movie, and then they get ready for training. Act 2 would have been the training, the moment of doubt, the all is lost moment where the gang split up, and their eventual reunification. And Act 3 is the kick-ass finale where the power of friendship trumps all and we get a super cool and badass finale. Instead, what should be the first act runs to about 15 to 20 minutes of this movie. We then spend a painful amount of time in the training section before they rush out a couple of all is lost moments and then rush resolve them. It feels like they forgot to put them in the first place. And then the third act is again super rushed and tonally completely different from what's come before it. The film clocks in at 97 minutes long, and realistically it could have made a super tight and extremely engaging 70-ish minute movie that was 10 times more coherent for it. It just really feels like they desperately wanted to get as close to 100 minutes as possible. There are way more training sequences than's really needed here, and low quality ones at that. Gratuitous use of slow-mo and several scenes of just repetition plague this movie. Alex and Tommy must have a man-to-man, heart-to-heart about half a dozen times through this thing, and while doing it 2 to 3 times is just about acceptable, anything more than that and it becomes noticeable and annoying to say the least. I would suggest the second act was the bit that needed tightening up the most, but yeah, this is a quite saggy film at times. As touched upon, while some of the characters are pretty well rounded and come across as cool and charismatic, there are a few weak links. Travis and Virgil in particular really just don't feel like they belong in this movie. With Travis's main character trope being that he's a man's man, a term I use here to mean he's a sexist, misogynist, racist, aggressive type who literally only breaks from that trope once in the whole movie, and Virgil, who really doesn't say much, is largely shown to be a bit of a quiet, eccentric spiritualist type, and who, honestly, if he was cut out of this script entirely, literally would not be missed. Sonny is kind of on that boat too. I think the writers put a bit too much emphasis on the relationship between Alex, Tommy and the coach, and as a result, that coupled with the performances being as strong as they are, it just kind of pushes the supporting cast onto the fringes of this one. Also, I couldn't quite fit it in anywhere else, so here's probably as good a place as ever. Coach's assholism gets a bit much by the second act, to the point that I think even the most irrational person wouldn't be quite as irrational as he's being with this. He literally throws Alex out of the team because he wants to see his dying son, knowing that in firing Alex it would probably trigger more of the team to quit as a result. I mean, there's dedication to your end goal, I get that, but imagine having to go to the committee that hired you to win the tournament to tell them that you can't do it because you kicked one of the best fighters out of the team and then doubled down on the other members to the point that they all quit. He'd be teaching Pee-wee soccer for life faster than his whistle could touch his lips. I know some people can be like that, but to me, all it did was create some last-minute artificial tension, when realistically I'd have rather Coach toned it down and 10 minutes were cut from this film. That's not to say, though, that on a general level it wasn't enjoyable, however. The dialogue's pretty good fun if you can ignore Travis. Seriously, that was a major buzzkill for me on this movie. And the characters are all written very distinctly in such a way that feels pretty believable and rarely drifts into over-the-top ham. Though ham is always welcome when it does start to appear in this one. It also must be said that the plot in and of itself is quite solid. I've seen quite a few movies like this at this point, and I'd say that this was, in my opinion at least, one of the better entries in the genre. It feels playful and light, and it contrasts that playfulness with some genuinely very emotional and serious moments to create a texture that, again, while not perfect, was one I definitely enjoyed enough to immediately start looking up a Blu-ray copy as the credits rolled. The script here was written by Philip Rhee and Paul Levine. Philip actually plays Tommy in this movie, and for what it's worth, I think he ultimately has the most involved plot of any of the characters in this movie. His character's one of the only ones to go through any kind of genuine development, as he literally fights his fears and lays to rest trauma that's plagued him for years. And on top of that, all the while, he's making a new best buddy out of Alex and improving his fighting technique. Ree has 6 credits, 3 for unreleased projects and 2 for Best of the Best. He wrote the 4th entry in the series alongside this one, and another movie called Underdog Kids. Honestly, he's more of an actor than a writer, and even then his most notable role is probably Tommy in these movies. Paul doesn't fare much better. He only has 2 writing credits, this movie and either a movie or a special, it's not 100% clear, called Aurora Operation Intercept, and that's it. I mean, as a first project for the pair of them, it's amazingly good contextually. It's flawed, but to get so much right straight out of the gate and on a first attempt nonetheless, well, I would say in that regard it was definitely quite praiseworthy. This was directed by Robert Radler. The guy has 23 directing credits, mainly for fantasy and action TV shows such as Hercules: The Legendary Journeys, but he's not a stranger to movies either, having directed this film's sequel, 2 entries in the Substitute franchise, and the movie Showdown. He was last seen in 2014, and honestly, the direction in this movie is perfectly fine until the 3rd act, and I'll explain why. So for Acts 1 and 2, anything based in the US was very clearly overseen by Radler, and for the most part the direction's just above average for these kind of pictures, I would say. He seems to have a real ability to get the best out of the cast and put his vision across on film. Mid-budget action movies like this can notoriously be a bit middle-of-the-road stylistically, either playing it overly safe in producing a picture that looks acceptable but's afraid to experiment, or trying to pull off more grandiose big-budget direction on a mid-to-low budget. And as a result, the latter option usually comes off a bit worse for wear when attempted. Here, well, it leans more towards the safe side of things. And while there are some sparkles of gold buried in this movie, when at least a third of your film is composed almost entirely of training montages, some of which are played at half speed, you can tell almost instantly that they're playing for time rather than artistic vision here. It just falls short of being anything absolutely spectacular. I wasn't expecting anything in the way of directorial quality with this one when I chose to watch it, and I came away surprised at how good it could be in some places, but just not good enough that it completely sold me on it, unfortunately. Now, for some reason, and I don't exactly know why, there's a very sharp tonal shift in directional style when the troupe arrive in Korea for their big tournament. For starters, the stadium that acts as the basis for the majority of the final act is incredibly underfilled. When watching the wides of the stadium, it's painfully noticeable, and in the close-up shots you can see that people have just been tightly clustered together to give the illusion of a packed stadium, when in fact it's just 50 to 80 people sat really close together. Everything's super dark in the stadium, and the lighting pretty much goes to pot ear as well. There's also some confusion in terms of presentation on this one, as they kind of hodgepodge 3 or 4 different directorial styles into the final act. 1 minute it's being shot like a TV broadcast, next we're seeing things unfold as if we're crowd members, then we're sat with the television audience around the world as they watch. Next we're following the US team for a bit and it's all more heavily focused on the team and less on the atmosphere. Then there'll be bits where it goes a bit arty and experimental. All the while, a sports commentator in the stadium is explaining the rules of the karate tournament and what's happening in real time. I feel like, had they picked 1 or 2 of those styles, maybe gone for the TV broadcast angle intercut with shots from the floor as the team focuses on winning, it probably would have been a bit more coherent. As it stands, it just feels very much like a Living in America sequence in Rocky IV type moment, just done on a budget of 2 moths and $1.83. But it doesn't stop there. There's weird tonal choices, like having Alex's kid turn up to the stadium having just come out of his coma, or having most of the fights punctuated with a dozen or so drummers, or the near constant cutaways to the commentator to get a rundown on how the karate tournament works. It all just seems very rushed, very inconsistent, and very confusing. And only adding to the weirdness, this is one of those films that just kind of stops. As in, it resolves around 95% of the film's goals, but rather than completely tie everything off, it just freeze frames and then the credits roll, which did rather leave me feeling a bit like, what? That's it? While the first two acts do feel like the director had all the time in the world to get the shots exactly how he needed them, that third act really feels like they were flying by the seat of their pants, with very mixed results. The Cine follows a very similar trajectory, truth be told, too. The first two acts are textbook with a reasonable range of shot variety that only rarely delve into the experimental, but on the whole this could be described as an overly safe film for the genre. Mixed shot types that follow standard scene setups coupled with some silky smooth tracking shots and just the odd dalliance into some creative shot types that ultimately left me happy but wanting more. By contrast, the third act more or less flips the switch on this one. With everything more or less surrounded in darkness throughout, there's a reliance on close-ups, there's way more experimentation with the composition, which I suppose is understandable given the limited subjects in the field of view to capture, but considering that the direction's a bit all over the place, it kinda just feels like they turned up to the shoot days, shot as strictly or as loosely as instructed, and worked solely to just get the day over with as quickly as possible. It feels rushed. The Cine and direction really dovetail though when it comes to the fight choreography, with everything except the final fight with Tommy more or less being shot the same way, and that way rather unfortunately is to mask punches and kick connections whenever possible, rather than utilising the more effective method of soft touch contact fighting. It leads me to believe that the choreographer for this movie either wanted to play it extra safe, what with 3/5 of the cast being exceedingly limited in their martial arts knowledge, or that this was somehow the director's choice. But yeah, in pretty much every scene I can remember, almost every punch or kick thrown is either masked by cuts so they never have to actually make contact, or is framed in such a way that the lack of contact isn't noticeable. And the only reason the final fight with Tommy isn't shot the same way is because Tommy and Dae-han in real life are brothers and both have experience in martial artistry, so were probably more comfortable with a bit of roughhousing. It's a shame really, and while I kind of understand ultimately why they chose to do that, I think had they gone down the soft contact route, it probably would have improved the Cine and direction in the first two acts tenfold. Performance-wise? Well, I never thought I'd say it, but Eric Roberts is genuinely phenomenal in a decent chunk of this. I won't lie, for about a third of this movie he's a bit overly dry, a bit too Mr. Good Guy All-American for my taste, but for at least a good half, if not 2/3, he's brilliant. He really puts passion into his emotional moments, and particularly in the second and third act, he genuinely shines as one of the most memorable parts of this movie. Philip Rhee is also fantastic as Tommy. While he also has a bit of a problem of being a bit too all-American everyman for me, much like Roberts, when the emotion and genuine feeling is needed, he's definitely all there. James Earl Jones is good fun as Coach, projecting a tough exterior that slowly but surely gives way to a man driven by the ghosts of his past to ensure he doesn't make the same mistakes again. It's a full-on performance from Jones, but one I sure as hell won't be forgetting anytime soon. And finally, it would be amiss of me not to mention Chris Penn as Travis. While not a particularly pleasant character, in fact I pretty much hate him, Penn sells that assholism. And while I personally don't think his redemption at the end of the film was nearly sincere enough, the ability to be so convincingly unpleasant really could not go without being mentioned here. Finally, the soundtrack. And it's basically dollar store Rocky IV. I have literally almost nothing else to say about it other than that. Listen to the Rocky IV soundtrack, now imagine it being produced by one man in his bedsit with a Yamaha synthesizer who's only heard the Rocky IV soundtrack once or twice, and you pretty much have the soundtrack for best of the best. It sounds like cheap 80s synth rock with lyrics all about chasing your dreams, not being left behind, having a burning passion to win, and never letting people down or being let down. It's unmemorable, but it just about does the job. There are one or two attempts at what I can only describe as stereotypical Asian-sounding compositions whenever we cut to Korea, but it's inescapable that this is just a cheap and clearly skimped-on soundtrack. It's not irritating, but basically it's not much of anything, which is about as nice as I can be about it. Best of the Best was released on VHS in the rental market in 1990 or 1991. I found different dates from different sources. It was distributed by Entertainment in Video, EIV to you and me. Unsurprisingly, this was cut due to the BBFC's policy on fighty men bad, reducing the runtime from 97 minutes to 93 minutes. Shortly after, it had a release in 1992 as a sell-through by 4Front Video, again in its cut form, and it would later receive a super cheap DVD release in 2002 by 4 Digital Media before landing fully uncut on Blu-ray as part of a Best of the Best collection in 2016 and as a solo release in 2017. I can't comment on the PQ of any of the digital releases, as I watched a version that was taped from Sky Movies at some point in the early 90s for the purpose of this review, though I'm led to believe that the broadcast master for this was actually sourced from the rental dub, and if so, it's not that bad. It's very crisp and colourful, and I really enjoyed the transfer. I think this could look quite lovely on Blu-ray. Best of the Best was a problematic picture for me. Flawed, but fun. While I liked the general plot and dialogue the script had to offer, the pacing was a bit awkward to sit through and the padding became insufferable at times. While I thought the direction and Cine were on the level, there were inconsistencies that rubbed me up the wrong way. And while the performances were all generally quite good, the occasional poor performance and hindered choreography really held back what could have been something that was special across the board. Throw in some weird tonal shifts in the third act and the cheap-sounding soundtrack, and while I'm definitely not saying that this is a bad movie, quite the opposite. If you like martial arts movies, I'd say definitely check this one out. Be aware that it isn't a perfect movie. It's just a very good example of the genre in that decade. But to me, it's got quite a bit of a way to go before I would say it's best of the best.